All right. Welcome to another episode of the Placing People First podcast. Before we meet today's guest, let's give a shout out to our sponsor, Bridging the Gap Recruitment. BTG offers recruiting and executive search services. Their team of recruiters have decades of experience with thousands of placements. They're always recruiting. If you're an employer, they may have qualified candidates ready for placement. And if you're looking for a position, make sure to send them your resume as they will actively market you to potential companies. Don't forget, they offer a 7-day guarantee. They guarantee to have qualified candidates to you in 7 days, or you save 50% of the placement fee. You can find more about Bridging the Gap at bridgingthegapus.com. And with that, let's jump straight in. I love when I get to put a book up. So today we are going to talk to Helen, and I'll let her introduce herself, but we're going to talk about this lovely book as well. So Helen, who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, sure. Helen Fanucci. And I thank you for having me on your podcast, first and foremost. I'm an author, a best-selling Amazon author, and I'm excited that we're going to talk about my book. I've been leading sales teams for over 25 years, and I currently work for Microsoft, leading a team of cloud solution architects and customer success managers. And I've worked at some of the name brand large tech companies that you would recognize, like IBM, Apple, and Sun Microsystems, in addition to, of course, Microsoft. And that's, I think, a bit about me. And I look forward to more questions and happy to chat more about myself if that's where you want to take the conversation.
For sure. Thank you for making time. I know we were just talking about kind of all of us getting back on the seat after the holidays, and depending on what market you're in, the weather messed a lot of people up.
For sure.
Appreciate you making time. So I do like the personal side. And so, let's talk about your journey a little bit. There were some big companies in there. I know you've done sales, you've managed teams. So just kind of give us, I guess, a little bit more in depth on your journey. How'd you get into it? How'd you land in sales? Kind of talk us through some of that.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I actually have an engineering degree from MIT, and my first job was with IBM as an engineer in the San Jose manufacturing facility. And about a year into it, I decided I wanted to be out with customers, helping them use the technology rather than in the back room. And so I was able to navigate myself into a marketing job and then actually a sales job. And while I was in that marketing role, I went through IBM's, at that time, 18-month sales training course. And then once I completed it, I got a sales territory in Silicon Valley. So that's how I started my sales career, and then progressed, worked for some small companies, started leading teams, worked overseas in London for a couple of years. And then it just kind of one thing led to another, and I've been able to navigate doing really interesting jobs. And always, a constant theme has been customer facing and field facing roles.
Love that. So the jump from engineer to sales is not normal. And in there, you mentioned the 18-month training. So that kind of defines some of it. Did you struggle to go from an engineer mindset to a sales mindset? Could you talk us through that journey?
Yeah. So first of all, when I told my boss, in the manufacturing engineering manager, when I told him I wanted to move into a customer facing role, and at that point, I was like a couple of years, early 20s, a couple of years into work. I wasn't sure exactly what roles would be available. And he had no idea how to navigate IBM or how to help me. But through my network outside of work, I actually met somebody who worked for IBM and was in a CAD/CAM, computer-aided design, computer-aided making systems. IBM made systems, so a CAD/CAM marketing team. So through him, I was able to navigate and meet the right people. And they were looking for people like me, people with an engineering background, to help market these computer-aided design terminals and systems, because the engineers and the engineering teams were the target market for them. So I think it's an example of being in the right place at the right time. And so I was able to navigate and was a great fit for that role. And they were kind enough to invest in me and to put me through IBM sales training. And unlike most of my peers at IBM sales training, most of them were right out of college, like MBAs, and they already worked in the sales office, but didn't meet with customers yet. I had a full-time job and I was doing the training kind of in parallel. So it was a little bit of a fuller plate perhaps, but I was able to navigate that. So that's how I made that happen.
Well, I think there's a couple takeaways there, depending on who's listening to this, right? If you are the engineer, just know that there might be some other opportunities out there for alignment, especially as we get into more long-term sales processes and immersive sales. And there's a lot more people involved. I know your book talks about that and how many touch points there are in sales now. It's a very complex process. And then I love your initiative. I love that, you went, hey, let's go learn and do and see what this can become. And yeah, I think there's a lot of right time moments in our stories. So with that, let's jump into the book. So tell us about Love Your Team. Where did this book come from? Give us the why is it here?
Okay. Yeah. So in July of 21, I was doing a keynote at a conference for sales leaders about retaining talent. Because if you recall the Great Resignation with 4+ million people resigning every month in the US. And so when I got to the part about retaining talent, I kind of thought, well, gee, a manager needs to care for their team, support their team. But what was authentic for me was to love your team. I felt like love was the right sentiment. And I was really nervous about using the word love in a business presentation. And I told the audience that I said, look, I'm nervous, but for me, what a manager must do is love their team. And then I unpacked what I meant by that and how I go about supporting the team and loving the team. And I got such a great response from the audience. It was super supportive and gratifying. And they asked me for, okay, well, more details about how do you go about doing this? And then in parallel, my husband, Chris, who's been in tech forever, and he's a CEO of a tech company, he said, you know what, I thought sales was kind of a BS kind of role. Sales management, excuse me, was a BS role. But what you do is really different. You should really write a book about it. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know that I'm so special or different, but he really encouraged me to write the book. And so it was kind of the receptiveness, of the audience in that July 2021 conference, and then my husband's encouragement.
Love that. And I love that, we'll talk about questions and kind of your core in here, but I want to tell people there's so much more to the book. And one of the quotes I pulled out, and it's on page 27, very first page of the first chapter. There's a deep-seated belief in traditional sales management. Sales skills are fixed, and then what worked in the past still works today and will still work in the future. It's fantasy, fairy tale, it's a myth. And so I share that to say there are so many more nuggets in the book than just your philosophy. Like there is a lot of takeaways on the culture of sales in today's environment, on how COVID has impacted our sales and hybrid workforce. So there's a lot of pieces here. So don't just go, hey, I'm not a sales manager, it's not for me. Like, no, there are nuggets in here if you are interested in the sales world. Let's talk about conversations. It seems like conversations are obviously at the key of your strategy. So give me the overview there. Why are conversations so important with our sales team?
Yeah, so when I reflected about what I actually do as a sales leader, I realized that the bulk of what I do is I have conversations with my team. And so I kind of used myself as a guinea pig, and I broke down the conversations that I was actually having into different categories over a 2-month period. And one might say this is the engineer in me coming out. But I wanted to I was curious, how do I spend my time? And I also really wanted this book to be a how-to book, and I call it a survival guide for sales managers. And so it became the core of the book. And every chapter, conversation chapter, there's 17 conversation chapters across 5 different categories. For example, the first category is conversations of connection. And the very first conversation chapter is about how does a sales manager introduce themselves to a new sales team? Because when you get a job as a sales manager, you're most often taking on a team that already exists. And I've been on the receiving end of managers doing that poorly because they think it's about them, where actually it's about the team and what the team needs to know about you. So I put literally in that chapter, I put the 3 slides that I use to introduce myself, a little bit about myself, my background, my career, my family, etc., what I like to drink or eat, fun facts. And then the second one is my management philosophy and approach. So they know what to expect and what I value and care about. And I list that out. And then thirdly, what's next and how I'm going to interact with them and how to communicate with me. And I have a cornerstone of my approach is a bi-weekly, every other week, one-on-one with my sellers. It's their agenda. And, I spend time with them, and that ends up being the place where I learn a lot about what's going on in their business and how I can best support them. I also make myself available for drive-by pings on Teams and conversations or IMs and what have you. So that's why I decided to have conversations be the cornerstone of the book, because it really is what I do when I'm managing my team.
That's such a good way to explain it. And I can see the engineer in you, right? I can see the methodology and the process. And I think that's what's awesome about this book is you can jump into any one of those conversations depending on where you're at in the life cycle with the team member and have some clarity in, well, where am I struggling with and what conversation should we be having? And then there's very clear examples in here of how that conversation may sound, which helps you if you're an introvert and extrovert. And to be honest, any team management, this is applicable because every position on a team has KPIs. And so we can still set performance expectations and we can still talk strategy. And so I love that piece of it. Let's talk about the team principles. And so you talked about in here trust, transparency, and caring. So could you elaborate on kind of the team principles and why they're important?
Yeah, so I really wanted to also not only talk about the conversations, but what underpins them. So building trust is job one for a manager, because if you're not able to have a level of transparency and trust building and relationship building with your team, it's very hard to support them and help them. And since I launched the book, I've gotten feedback that some sales manager seller relationships are adversarial, where the sellers are in fear of actually telling their manager what is going on, or if a deal is dropping out of the forecast in a given month or quarter, because they're concerned about the repercussions or losing their job. And that really robs the sales manager and the company from being able to course correct early and get the deal back on track. And so I think particularly if your goal is to retain your talent, top talent in particular, you've got to have a trust relationship. So that's job one. And by the way, it's exactly the same skills that I expect the sellers to have with their customers. So I'm modeling the behavior that I expect them to see, that I expect to see in them. So trust, transparency, support, caring, those are foundational principles. And I outline those in the book. And then I also talk about the skills, the conversational skills sales managers need with their team.
That approach is so interesting. And I love that you give the analogy of how they approach the customer is how I approach them, because I'm a consultant. And so as I'm reading your stuff, I love it because it just reminds me of a consulting session with clients. And that's why I've always had that mentality with my team is I want to ask a lot of questions. I want to know what's going on. I want to make sure they feel heard. And that's where you get, to be honest, as a leader, you get the best feedback, right? Because you're not in the trenches every day. And so no matter what role you're managing, you're going to get feedback that if you just listen can change the whole organization. But if you're just trying to dictate and crack the whip, you're probably missing out on a whole bunch of feedback that could be huge. So can you talk to me about a time when you've worked with someone through this process and kind of where they were before and where they ended up, and kind of what that success journey looks like?
Yeah, so a cornerstone of what I do is to try to, one, understand what my team members are looking for on their terms, what success looks like. And it's different for different people, for sure. Flexibility, promotion, becoming a manager, what have you, maximizing income. There's different goals. So I try to support them on their terms. So I had 3 team members in the last year. All 3 of them wanted to become managers. And you might go, oh gosh, you're supporting your team to leave your team. Well, it actually helps me as a manager if I'm known as a magnet for promoting team and for career development. And so I had those team members shadow me. I had them step in for me when I was on vacation so they could get the experience of doing a forecast call. So I didn't have all 3 of them at the same time, but they did it, took turns and did different things. All 3 of them are now promoted to management. So that's one example. Another example is putting people on performance improvement plans because they weren't meeting expectations, and then coaching them and working with them. And I've actually had people work themselves out of a performance management situation to be able to go on and be successful and move into new roles or stay in the existing role. And so that also, I think, is pretty rare. And certainly in my 25 plus years managing teams, most people who are on a performance improvement plan end up leaving. Either they go, you're right, this isn't the right job for me, and they leave on their own, or it's, it might get to the point where they end up losing their job because they're not performing. So to have people work themselves out of a performance situation and still continue to do the job is gratifying. Because mostly I find that it's not binary, that they're crap at everything. Otherwise, they wouldn't have that job to begin with. So if you just work on the pieces where it's not measuring up and help them, kind of build skill, but they have to be willing participants. And so those are a few examples of how I've worked with people and the results and success that they've had.
So let's talk about the PIP, because I thought that was another great takeaway in your book, because you're right. I think when a lot of people get stuck on a performance track, I think often the manager, decision maker, owner of the company at that point kind of is finding a way to write the person out the door, right? Like, let's put them on so we can do enough write-ups so that we have enough documentation to help them exit, instead of like, let's set actionable, reachable goals. Let's identify gaps. Let's create a plan. Let's train and support that to maximize this person that we took time hiring, we took time onboarding, we took time integrating. And so let's make sure, again, one, are they willing? Yes, right? If they are willing, then let's make sure we're executing. So what are some examples of how you fill those gaps, how you reskill? Like, what other things can we do to try to elevate that talent and maybe get them re-engaged?
Yeah, so first and foremost is setting outcome-based performance goals and objectives. And so I list that in the book, because if you don't have clarity of objectives to start with, then that's going to be a challenge. And always I have, of course, quota objectives, but I have non-financial goals as well, like getting higher in the organization, the customer organization, or broader, building executive relationships, things like that. And that's important, really, especially in a hybrid environment where you don't see your sellers. So you have to checkpoint on the outcomes. So some of the things that I've done to get more directly to your point is it's always, it varies on the expectation of that role, which varies on the seniority of the individual. If they're very senior, I expect them to create a plan and a strategy to show me how they're going to close those gaps with little intervention. But again, sort of bite size. And honestly, when I do a PIP, people then have the opportunity or requirement to meet with me weekly. So I'll do a weekly instead of bi-weekly one-on-one to checkpoint progress. So it could be that what they need to do, for example, if they're struggling with delegation and people don't want to work with them, then there's some things that I ask them to do, which is one, delegate and show me how you're not being in every meeting or micromanaging, because selling is a team sport, particularly with big enterprises. So I expect them to be able to demonstrate those skills. It could be pipeline coverage. They're not building pipe. They're consistently missing their goal. So then I expect them to do a better job of pipeline coverage, which if you break that down is, are they talking to enough people? Are they mobilizing the resources across, in this case, Microsoft, to talk to people to build a pipeline? So there's a lot of different things it could be, but I try to zero in on the thing where the gap. And at Microsoft, under Satya's leadership, we have a value of a growth mindset. So people can grow and learn. And if I don't give them that opportunity in coaching to grow and learn, I'm not acting consistently with Microsoft's cultural values. And then I'm the problem. And so it's, it's kind of, if you write somebody off, then it's kind of like, well, they can't do it and then they won't do it. That's very different than giving them the opportunity with the clarity of communication and coaching to demonstrate that they can step up and then monitor, and they either will step up or they won't. But you're giving people that opportunity. It kind of objectifies, if you will, the performance, so then it becomes super clear, how to move forward after, 6 to 8 weeks of managing somebody.
There's two things I hear there that I want people to really hear again. And I think that that's probably the part of the podcast. If you're going to listen, go back and listen to that answer, because there's so many little nuggets in there that may click with something you're dealing with in your organization, or if you're a sales rep, it may click with something that you could be improving on. And the first, and you said it a couple of times, is outcomes, right? So we have to know what we're holding our team accountable to, and they have to know, and it has to be transparent. And so we'll dive into that in a second, because I think that that's a huge mistake and probably something you've seen missed a lot of times. And then the second thing you've talked about twice now is frequency of communication. And that's something that when I had Liz and I did her podcast, that came up like 5 times, right? Like, we can't just hire people, put them in a seat and go have fun. Like, we actually need to communicate and have a cadence to that. So let's start with outcomes first. So we go through the process, we onboard this amazing salesperson that we culturally think is great. We've done all the due diligence and personality tests and whatever our hiring process is. How do we set outcomes and have that conversation? What's that conversation look like?
Yeah, so some of them may be handed down by your company. For example, every individual at Microsoft has a diversity and inclusion goal and expectation. So that's another non-financial one. And actually, we all write our own. So quota, I think revenue attainment and quota attainment is an obvious one. Now, I also expect 3x pipeline coverage, pipeline hygiene and updating, and I explain why. For example, if we don't represent our pipeline accurately, we don't get the investments from Microsoft to help us achieve those goals and outcome. So we're hurting ourselves and our customers if we're under forecasting in particular. Forecast accuracy is also expected. And at Microsoft, it's plus or minus 3% under the current, regime that I work in. And so there isn't, a ring the bell moment for under forecasting and over delivering, because for the reasons I just mentioned. So I set outcome-based objectives, and it's documented in a form that we use. And then I also ask the employee, okay, what are you going to do in this next coming period? We at Microsoft review performance formally within, every 2 or 3 times a year. but every month I have the opportunity, and I do pipeline reviews, of course, and when I do forecasting and all the things that you'd expect. So I get to know my team and understand how they're behaving. I also expect that they will, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, that they will get more senior in the organization and build stronger relationships. So we look at a relationship map. So where are they? Let's say it's September 1st. Where are they in their relationships, both Microsoft as a company, but them personally? And then where do they want to go? And how do they plan to get there? And do they need help? Like sometimes we need to have a senior executive who's aligned from a functional level, a peer, if you will, because let's be honest, sales reps can't get meetings with all of the senior executives we might have the ambition that they meet with. So we have some bait in the bucket moments, right? So I strategize with them about that. So those are some examples of concrete expectations. And then, as I mentioned, I meet with them biweekly, and periodically we'll go through that, like quarterly, we'll go through that relationship map and see where they are, that kind of thing.
Again, I like that it's not just do $1 million in gross revenue. Like that's not an objective, right? That is a piece of all of the objectives, but you talked about it, right? What's our volume? What's our touches? What's our follow through? Do we have anything that's cold? Do we need to move that out of our projections so that we have real accurate pipeline data? And then what else are we trying to accomplish in the company? Path forward, relationship building, personal goals, whatever else that might be. And so if you are a manager or an owner listening to this, you need, and all you have is a top line revenue goal, you need to get real with your pipeline, right? Like you need to understand, like, what are you holding them to and what's it take to get there? Because you mentioned 3x coverage, and depending on your industry, that answer is going to be different, right? If you're low ticket, high volume, it might be different. If you're high ticket, low volume, right? So depending on the metric, and so that's all custom, but Helen gave us some takeaways there that you should be able to look at your process and go, am I holding them accountable to enough? And are we transparent enough here to really understand what we're working on? Cadence of meetings. So you do bi-weekly. Why is that where you settled versus weekly? Do you do daily stand-ups? Like any other meetings that you have with your sales team or that you recommend sales managers or owners have with their teams?
Yeah. So first of all, what I propose in my book is what I do, and your mileage may vary. You might do something different. And I'll say what I propose also, because some of your listeners might think, holy smokes, that's so much time. I don't have that time. It's 15% of my time in a month based on a 40-hour work week. So what I propose, which includes these biweekly meetings and also monthly forecast and pipeline reviews. And so I let my team know that's my standard, but they can request something different. So they may request less frequent or more frequent. I have found that people who request less frequently, over time, we end up coming closer to biweekly because there's just so much that goes on. And some of the sellers will request weekly, particularly if they have a top deal and there's a lot of moving parts and more help is needed. So I just kind of settled on that. The other thing is I don't manage their activity. So what they do on a day-to-day basis, I don't really care. I trust them to run their business and to take the actions they need to deliver the result. So to me, a daily or weekly is a little too frequent to connect. Now, from a stand-up point of view, there will be interim meetings. So for example, there may be a team meeting about a particular deal, and maybe the CFO of the company has just left and we need to strategize to find, who knows the new CFO. And so that might be a separate meeting with just my sellers, or it might be some of the extended team, or maybe on LinkedIn, it could be with somebody that we see, that we know, who knows that new executive that just landed in our account. So there are some ad hoc meetings or more frequent meetings. And in particular, if there are customer issues and situations, or I see email going back and forth, a couple times, I'll say time out and I'll set up a call, because my philosophy is email does not equal communication. And if there's an issue to be worked out, talking about it with the right participants is way more effective than a bunch of emails going back and forth.
There's a takeaway there. That just came up on a call today where they got the novel email and then they replied with a novel and then they watched the communication spiral and they go, what's your advice? Your first response back when they sent you a novel should have been, that's awesome, let's hop on a meeting. Because there's too much interpretation if it's that complex. And so that's such an interesting takeaway and an aha moment. And again, I love the examples you provide because there is no one size fits all model, right? And you have found what works with each team member, what works in the environment you're in. But I love that you gave examples of cadence and frequency, and you aren't managing how many outbound calls did you have today. Like, you're also working in enterprise sales. And so we would hope that like we're managing pipe correctly. But again, love your feedback. And I can tell that you have just a wealth of knowledge. Let's talk about the recruiting side. I always like to talk about, right, retaining should be a priority. If you have top talent, keep them and make sure that you're doing whatever you can. But if we are growing, we are going to need to expand team. How do we find team members and how do we know we're getting the right ones?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So, I think it's important to keep a strong pipeline of talent. So networking, relationships, sometimes we may have multiple sellers that are great candidates, but they won't all get the job. One will get the job. So keeping, kind of a queue of resumes. When we are hiring a high volume of people with kind of similar job descriptions, we have a big engine, if you will, called Always On Hiring at Microsoft. And so recruiting does, their part, and employees can recommend people. But literally my team was doing, and myself, because I participate as well, was doing 6 interviews a week with a team set. Well, we'd have individual interviews, but there'd be like a recruiting or an interview team of 3 people. So we would interview 3 candidates in the morning, we'd debrief, interview 3 candidates in the afternoon. And we did that weekly for a while when we had so many open roles. Now, just given the economic headwinds and situation in the market today, we don't have that process in place. But it still behooves managers to keep a pipeline of talent, and relationships and network. And I'm going to make a plug for diverse teams, because the data is really clear that buyers prefer buying from diverse teams, and diverse teams are shown to be more effective. One of the mistakes, I think, including, I would say, probably Microsoft, one of the mistakes companies often do is they'll look for diverse talent in the top, Ivy League schools. Well, there's great talent in a lot of different places. And so also to consider, kind of a broader mindset and approach to find talent where they are, and consider that as you build a pipeline of talent for your next job opening.
The nugget there, all I'm going to duplicate is the network, right? That was exactly where you started. Your first answer was network and relationship building, and then you went into everything else. And I think that even plays into your last answer, right? Which is, if you're networking and building the relationships, you should always be hiring, right? And I think people often get caught, with their pants down per se, where it's like, my top talent left for something outside of my control, which happens, right? Family matters, death, traveling. There's a lot of interesting things COVID exposed that can impact your team that are outside your control. And the last thing you want to do is have an empty pipeline of potential talent and start the process. And I know in your book, you talk about some exact numbers for it. But I mean, we could be talking millions and millions in lost revenue, depending on the size of your sale and how long it takes to find, place, train, and scale them up to your performing talent, because no one can step in and perform on day one, right? They have to understand the culture, the process, who's involved. Like there's pieces there. So again, just love your knowledge, and I love the little nuggets in there, and I hope people are really hearing those. Now let's talk to sellers. Let's talk to the salesperson. So the sales professional that's listening to this, and maybe they want more, maybe they're the top talent and they're crushing it. And maybe they're starting to look, right? Like, what advice do we have for that top talent of like, should you stay somewhere? Do you negotiate for more pay? Do you go find positions? Like, what's some advice to your top talent?
Yeah, it's a great question. And by the way, I've had millennials and top talent tell me that the book is really applicable to them, because sometimes they may not know what good looks like, or it helps them formulate their criteria of what they're looking for. So I'd say first and foremost, a manager and a culture, company or team culture that resonates with what they care about. So that will be different for different people. And by the way, you can't always control it, particularly if you're in a large organization that's reorganizing. You might join a team that you've picked really carefully and then find yourself 3 months later being moved to another team, which happened to me in 2020. And so my next thing is, okay, someone moved my cheese, so to speak. What can I learn from the new leadership team? And how can I have this work for me, et cetera? So I would say get clear about what you're looking for and what you care about. And for some people, like particularly post-COVID, remote work, work-life flexibility, it might be budgets to travel to customer meetings all the time. And some companies are doing that and some aren't. And it might be, kind of the caliber, your assessment of the caliber of the people, the team, the brand recognition. There's so many reasons and criteria. And I would say for the sellers looking, network and talk to people and listen to, get recommendations for managers that are great to work for and companies that are great to work for, and try to get to know those managers and people. A top talent can build a pipeline of potential new managers ahead of looking for a new job as well. So the advice of a hiring manager, hiring talent, building network, you can flip it on the side, the other way around as well.
So another takeaway, network, is what I heard again. And so I hope you guys hear that. And I love to find the network nuggets in everyone, because obviously that's what I beat the drum on. But I love to hear that on the sales side, because you're right? Recommendations help, the referral into companies or to managers, and understanding culture. But I think the takeaway there is, if you are in a position and you're not happy with something, truly take the time to reflect on what piece of the puzzle is it? Because it used to just be money, right? It used to be this chase to the top, and I want to make more and I want to make more. And I think we have seen the world has changed. And so now it's flexibility, it's culture, it's team, it's support, it's different style of budgets. The rewarding system might be different depending on companies. So, if you find yourself in that moment of like, maybe I want to change, like really dig into that and understand what you're wanting change in, what piece of that puzzle, and then go back to the conversation part, right? Let's have some real conversation with where we're at and see, like, can the company I'm with support that? Because if they're smart, they'd want to retain you too.
Yeah, for sure.
So last two questions. The first question I like to ask is, if you look at your own journey, what's some advice you would give your younger self?
Gosh, be more confident. I thought that everybody else knew and had, they were wired for success and knew what they were doing. And that is so not true. People are making it up as they go along, and particularly as the world changes. So I think there's times when I could have been more confident and sure of myself, rather than kind of, looking around to see and asking for advice. I mean, it's good to ask for advice, but I think sometimes, particularly early in my career, I was less confident in myself.
Confidence, good nugget there. Book recommendation. So I always ask for book recommendation. Obviously, we've plugged your book, but what's another book you recommend people should read?
Oh, that's a good one. So, Mindset by Carol Dweck. I think that that's foundational, whether you are leading a team, whether you're a parent. There's great fixed mindset, growth mindset comparisons in there. That's an amazing book. Really, really great. I'm reading a book I just read over the weekend called The Outsiders, which is from 2012, and it's about CEOs that have made they have over time generated outsized performance in terms of return on valuation of stock. So that one, actually Satya had recommended that I found really interesting. And there's a lot of Warren Buffett themes around that and managing. And then I'm reading a book called The Girl in the Gun Club. I was invited to participate in a book club, and I've never been in a book club. And that's the book that the book club is reading. It's about a woman who joined the Marines and her experience in the Marines.
I think a subtle takeaway there we should probably highlight is you have multiple references and you're reading multiple books, which everyone I interview is the top performer. That's a true statement, whether you're digesting through podcasts or books. So if you're not, I mean, obviously, if you're listening to this, you're open to education, but pick up a book, right? And go read and learn and expand. And I love the book club one, right? Because there's a lot to learn in those other stories as well. So that's a great recommendation. So we have covered a lot of your book. We've covered a lot when it comes to managing and sales and hiring and retaining. What have we missed?
Gosh, well, I think you just can't underestimate how important it is to get to know your team, and that managers are the key to retaining talent. It's pretty well known people leave their managers, not their company. So it's really on us as managers to figure out what we need to do to be the kind of manager that our team members need and want, and figure out how we'll rise to the occasion to support them so that we all have tremendous results. It's a proven model. It's created success for me, and I'm confident that it can and will for others.
Now you sparked a follow-up question I have to ask. And so
Go
that's
for
great.
it.
I love it. So bonus question, I guess the titled manager, right? So in sales, I think this happens, right? We have a top performer that's absolutely crushing it and they rise to the top. And then some organizations take that sales leader and make them a manager. Can every sales leader be a manager, or like what should we do in that moment? Because I feel like that can be done incredibly wrong.
Yeah, well, it depends if they want to be a manager. So the skills to be a great seller are different than the skills to be a great manager. So I think that logic is flawed. If you don't care about your team, if you don't care about your people, if you just want to do it your way, don't be a manager. Save everybody the pain and agony. So I have a strong opinion about that. Sellers can be great managers, but they have to want that, and they have to be open to learning and listening and doing things differently. It's not all about them and what they can do. It's really about supporting their team, because that's how you get the bigger results.
And with that, we're going to wrap up. How do people get a hold of you? Obviously, they can go buy your book. If they want to connect with you, what's the best way to connect with you?
LinkedIn.
Perfect. So LinkedIn link will be below this. If you're on the website, it'll be in the description. If you're on YouTube, it'll be down below. If you're on a podcast platform, head over and read the description. There'll be timestamps. Depending on what platform you're on, give us a like, write a comment. I'll get those to Helen to make sure we can provide more feedback. We're always happy to record another episode. If you guys have a series of questions you'd like us to answer, we can dive into those. Helen, I appreciate you taking the time and sharing your wealth of knowledge and wisdom with us. And I look forward to continuing the conversation with you.
Thank you.